Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Samuel Collins, the coding and billing expert for chiropractic and the HJ Ross Company Insurance Information Network and Seminars with another episode of ChiroSecure's Growth Without Risk. And to make sure there's without risk is to make sure we're always doing and billing properly. So today's topic is going to be on chiropractic and proper use of modifiers, because of course there have been some changes occurring recently, and I'm sure some of you have gotten some denials for not having the proper modifier. So let's make sure we have the right ones. Let's go to the slides. And as always, you can see here on the opening slide, we give our title and, of course, my email address. That being said, let's go into what are modifiers. Modifiers are per CPT, and the modifiers are referred to as level 1 modifiers, meaning just simple type, and they're used to supplement information to adjust care descriptions to provide extra details. So by example, you might use a modifier 25 to indicate that there's a separate distinct exam, or maybe modifier 59. So the modifier helps to tell us something specific about the code being billed, that it's not included or something special about it. That being said, these modifiers are used for these reasons. A service has been increased or decreased, has professional and technical component, only part of the service was performed, something was independent, or it's expected to be denied. And these are the common ones we run into chiropractic. However, at the end of the day, just keep it simple. A modifier is nothing more than a 2-digit code or number that allows us to tell something specific about the care. For the most part, it's going to be numbers, but recently we're running to many more that have letters. For instance, I'm sure you're familiar with modifier AT for Medicare. So here's what we want to cover though. What's new, or maybe better stated, what is confusing? And I think that's really the issue we're running into. So here's one of the things going on. If you're familiar with the VA Choice Program or PC3 program, there is a requirement for modifiers for claims. In fact, I'm given a direct quote from the chiropractic section under the Tri-West Alliance, and it says, chiropractic care codes such as physical therapy modalities frequently need modifiers when providers submit claims. Without these modifiers, claims and payment will be denied, and providers will have to resubmit with corrections. If you're unsure what modifiers to use, please refer to your coding resource. Now, what I find funny about this is they're telling you you need a modifier, but won't tell you what it is. So what is this modifier? In fact, if you call them, they will not tell you. So I bet many of you, when you first built the VA program, were never paid for therapy because you didn't know the modifier they needed. So what the heck is this modifier? Well, the modifier is GP. GP for physical therapy is a required modifier for all VA claims. The GP modifier by Medicare refers to a service delivered under an outpatient therapy plan of care. This means that that service is being delivered as part of a plan of care that's not in a hospital or an outpatient. So all therapy codes, notice 97010 through 97799, meaning all physical medicine codes, must be appended with GP. Now notice how I made that statement. I said physical medicine codes. And the reason I make that distinction is physical medicine is the service. Physical therapy is when a physical therapist delivers it. So I always like to refer to it properly as physical medicine codes. Bottom line is, when billing to the VA, always include GP on the physical medicine code, or it will be denied. The GP does not change the price. It just simply indicates it as a payable service. Now, GP, in a sense, is kind of like the AT modifier that we use for Medicare for physical therapy. It's just now required on federal claims. Well, where else is federal claims? Well, of course, Medicare. I'm sure you've noticed over the past year, because this became true in 2018, Medicare claims by a doctor of chiropractic where there is billing for physical medicine services must also have modifier GP. If there is no GP, Medicare will not process with patient responsibility for a secondary payer to make payment. In other words, it simply will be denied. Now, physical medicine services, then, of course, everything 97010 through 97799 must be appended with modifier GP. But because it's Medicare, you also need a GY. Now, the GY is a specific only Medicare modifier to indicate that it's an excluded service. Just because we put a GP with it doesn't mean Medicare is going to pay. It simply indicates that Medicare knows that we know it's an excluded service. So you can notice the examples at the bottom. I put the code for exercise 97110, and you'll notice there's a GY GP and a GP GY. The order of the modifiers doesn't matter. If you put GY first or GP first, it does not matter to Medicare. They just simply must appear. But there can be some instances, for instance, at the code 97140 manual therapy, you'll notice this one has three modifiers, 59, GY, and GP. And of course, that 59 is the modifier we use to indicate a separate, distinct service. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but I just want to highlight that if you need three modifiers, there are spaces for them. In fact, on a standard 1500 claim form, you may now place up to 4 modifiers, but again, emphasis towards making sure they appear. The order is not as important as making sure they're there. Well, where else is this GP required? Well, on any other federal claims, and that includes so-called Medicare Advantage plans. So when billing a Medicare Advantage plan, any physical medicine code must too have GP. These plans, because they're not Medicare Direct, don't require the GY or excluded service code, but they do require the GP. And the good news is many of these Medicare Advantage plans are covering and paying for therapies. So that's certainly a good advantage for us in these, not only a Medicare Advantage, but an advantage to the provider where it can be paid. So federal claims, Medicare, federal claims, VA, and actually any federal claim should have modifier GP on the physical medicine services. But where else is this required? And this is new for this year from United Healthcare and beginning in June for Optum Health. And their new policy says to ensure accurate adjudication of claims, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy services providers are required to append the claim with the HCPCS specialty modifier. When physical therapy or occupational therapy services are provided, the claim must include these modifiers to identify the benefit. Now realize this goes to all therapy providers. Don't be fooled when you see the term just physical therapy, occupational therapy. They're actually indicating any provider of a service within scope when billing for United Healthcare or Optum Health, which of course is affiliated, those two need GP. So make sure federal claims, United Healthcare, Optum Health, all get a GP on physical medicine service. However, what's the one modifier we all use? Well, let's make sure this is 100% usage. Doctors of chiropractic that do exams, which of course is all of us, whenever you do an exam with treatment, you have to append a 25 modifier. So the most common modifier for chiropractic claims is modifier 25. This modifier appended to the evaluation and management code indicates the E&M being reported, and I've underlined this, is separate and distinct from the inherent evaluation associated with a chiropractic adjustment or other treatment of the day. So notice the examples, 99203, new patient, or 99213, established patient, both have modifier 25 to indicate that it is a separate, distinct service from manipulation. But I do want to emphasize it's not just if you're billing manipulation. If you are also billing any therapy, even if there's no manipulation that day, it still requires the 25. It does not change the price. It's just separate and distinct. Do be careful. Of course, you cannot bill an E&M daily, but certainly can bill an E&M when appropriate, which of course is first visit and on re-exams. However, there's another problem modifier. This problem modifier is modifier 59. It's not the problem. The problem is how they include it. So you'll notice the three services I have listed here: 97112, neuromuscular education, 97124, massage, and 97140, manual therapy. The modifier needed for any of these codes is modifier 59. So you must append it to any of these codes in order to distinguish that it is separate and distinct. The bigger problem, though, is look at bullet 2. The reason this modifier is required is to demonstrate that the services noted above were provided to a region that is not part of the spinal CMT. So it literally means for it to be paid, you have to use a modifier 59, but in addition, it must be to a region you're not manipulating as far as spine. So for instance, if the adjustment was done to the cervical spine only and myofascial release to the lumbar spine, then it would be payable and you simply would include modifier 59. Notice this now includes massage and neuromuscular reeducation. So be very careful to make sure, are you demonstrating in your chart notes that it is a separate area? Because the 59 is your statement that it is. And I've had a lot of offices recently, particularly with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois and other blues, as well as Aetna, being very strict to look at your notes to make sure that it's separate. When possible, certainly do diagnosis pointing. There are subsets, though, of modifier 59, and this might be a bit helpful. These subsets were established by CMS some 4 years ago, and they are modifiers XS, XE, P, S, and U. And so you'll notice I have all of them listed. XE says separate encounter, which means a separate visit, or XS, a separate structure, XP, a separate practitioner, or XU, that it's non-overlapping. Well, I highlighted the XS in blue because notice that one is the specific one that a doctor of chiropractic would use, because notice it says a service that is distinct because it was performed on a separate organ structure. So in other words, I did the myofascial to the shoulder and I adjusted the neck. I did myofascial to the lumbar spine, but I did myofascial to the cervical spine. Be very clear that you are following that, simply not billing for the adjustment. You have to not have done the adjustment to the area. The tricky part here is it only involves the spine. If you were to provide a manual therapy to a knee and adjust the knee, that would not need a separate area. It's the spine only. But if you prefer, you can use these modifiers instead. The obviously most common would be XS. In addition, another modifier that of course is common is for Medicare. And this modifier is AT, or I like to think of active treatment or acute treatment, but technically it means simply pay the chiropractic claim as medically necessary. Spine manipulation that is corrective must have the AT modifier on the adjustment code or the claim will automatically be denied. So that's a modifier that's exclusive to Medicare. Notice I did not indicate to use it any place but Medicare. However, what about Medicare Advantage plans? Medicare Advantage plans are so-called Medicare Part C, but these are plans persons will buy or trade their Medicare benefits for. These could be plans like Secure Horizons or Kaiser or other types that sell them. I mean, United and others sell them. And on these plans, you're going to bill just like Medicare, subluxation and a secondary diagnosis, but also as far as modifier is concerned, you're going to use modifier AT. So again, for Medicare Advantage plans, you're going to use the modifier AT as well. Again, I'm going to focus you in. The newest modifier that we're having issues is putting the GP on the physical medicine codes for federal plans, VA, Medicare, and all the others, but also making sure that for Medicare, we're using GY or AT when necessary. And then, of course, modifier AT when it comes to corrective care for Medicare. But what about one other one for Medicare? And this is why I wanted to make sure to go through these. There's another modifier for Medicare, and this is common. A patient that's undergoing maintenance care. Let's say you have a patient that enjoys getting chiropractic care in their Medicare age, and they're done with their acute part of care, and they say, hey, doc, this feels really good. Can I come once a week? Well, that's certainly acceptable. But what you have to use to make sure that the patient understands that's not going to be covered, because that type of care is maintenance, is modifier GA. Modifier GA is used when a voluntary waiver or so-called advanced beneficiary notice or ABN is used to inform the patient the CMT to the spine is not going to be covered by Medicare. In other words, we are informing the patient beforehand that it's not covered. When billing Medicare, if they've chosen option 1 on the ABN, you would then bill with modifier GA. And what GA indicates to Medicare is the patient's accepted responsibility. And of course, Medicare will give patient responsibility that the patient is paying. The good news is when a patient is signed this waiver, I want you to be aware that Medicare no longer dictates the fee. If you have a Medicare patient that's on maintenance and you indicate such on the Medicare waiver or ABN, you may at that point charge your normal fee. You certainly can continue to charge the Medicare rate if you prefer, but you're not limited to the Medicare rate. But one thing to know, this GA modifier does not apply to Medicare Advantage plans. They do not accept it. For Medicare Advantage plans, you're either billing the service as corrective with AT or you're not. They do not accept the GA modifier. And frankly, they can often be potentially a little more generous in allowance of services. So at the end of the day, make sure you have your correct modifiers. And the one I want to emphasize again, make sure you have the GP. I want you to be compliant. Always have your office up and running to make sure you know all the rules and strategy. Well, one of the easiest ways, go to HJ Ross. We are your resource. We will help you. Get a contact with us. Go to our website, send us an email, come to a seminar. Here's all our information here. Just go to those pages. We have your answers. I thank you for your time, and I'll see you again on ChiroSecure's Let's Grow Without Risk.